7 million years ago, in the dense humid forests of Africa, a common ancestor of both humans and chimpanzees stood up on its hind legs. It was a small, clumsy change, but it set off a chain reaction that we're told created the world we see today. Over the next few million years, these hominins evolved through a grueling process of survival. They weren't quite apes anymore, but they weren't us yet. Their brains grew larger, slowly pushing against the limits of their skulls. When they discovered the secret of fire, a flickering light in a world of absolute darkness, they learned to follow the migration patterns of the beasts they hunted, not out of ambition, but out of a desperate need for food, clothing, and shelter. If you walk into a museum today and look at the Acheulean hand axe, you'll see a teardrop-shaped stone, chipped and sharpened on both sides. It was the smartphone of its era, the pinnacle of prehistoric technology. But here is the thing about that hand axe that the textbooks gloss over. Our ancestors used that exact same design with almost no changes for 1.5 million years. To put that into perspective, think about our own timeline. We went from the first fragile wooden plane at Kitty Hawk to landing a man on the moon in just 66 years. We went from the first vacuum tube computer to a supercomputer in every pocket in less than a century. Evolution, we are told, is a slow, agonizing crawl of tiny accidental successes that take thousands of generations to stick. It's supposed to be a curve.
1.5 million years to figure out a better way to sharpen a rock. I get frustrated if a new iPhone comes out and the charging port is slightly different. These guys were the ultimate, if it ain't broke, don't fix it crowd. Or maybe they just didn't have the hardware to imagine anything better.
About 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens, creatures that look exactly like us, appeared on the scene. And for the next 200,000 years, we did, nothing. We sat in the dirt. We used the same stone spears. We lived in the same caves. We were smart animals, sure, but we were just that, animals, and we weren't alone. We shared the planet with the Neanderthals, stronger, faster, and perfectly adapted to the harsh Ice Age environment. Most importantly, their brains were the same size as ours. In some cases, and they were actually larger. If the secret to human dominance was brain size, we should be living in a Neanderthal world. They had the hardware. They had a 200,000-year head start. Yet, while we eventually built cathedrals and split the atom, the Neanderthals never progressed past the sharpened stone. Mainstream archaeology calls it the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. A sudden explosion of art, complex tools, and symbolic thought that happened about 50,000 years ago, amidst the moment humans suddenly started acting human. But biology doesn't work that way. You don't sit in a cave for 2,000 centuries and then wake up one Monday morning with the ability to paint the Sistine Chapel or map the stars.
It's like having two identical laptops sitting on a desk. One is running a basic calculator app, and the other is running a global simulation. The cases are the same, the processors are the same. So why is the output so different?
Because it isn't a hardware problem. It's a code problem. We are told we evolved to be the masters of the earth through a natural process. But when you look at the gap, the 200,000 years of silence, followed by a vertical line of progress, you realize we didn't just get smarter. We were patched. In 2022, inside the sterilized, silent halls of the Max Planck Institute of Molecular Cell Biology and Genetics in Dresden, Germany, a group of scientists were staring at a screen that should have been impossible. They were looking at a single letter in the 3-billion-year-old book of life. We're told that our DNA is a slow-moving river, a series of random mutations that eventually, over millions of years, turn a fin into a foot or a snout into a face. But the team in Dresden found something that didn't look like an accident. They found a gene called TKTL1. Every animal on this planet has a version of this gene. Chimpanzees have it, Neanderthals had it. It's a standard piece of biological hardware. But in modern humans, the code is different. In the transition from version 1.0 to us, a single amino acid was swapped. One letter. Now, in the grand scheme of evolution, a single amino acid swap is usually a footnote. It's a typo that does nothing. But when the Max Planck researchers placed the human version of this gene into lab-grown brain organoids, they watched a miracle, or a nightmare, unfold in real time. The neocortex, the part of the brain responsible for high-level reasoning, complex language, and the ability to imagine a future, didn't just grow. It exploded. The human patch caused a massive surge in the production of basal radial glia, the cells that literally build the human mind.
So, we're talking about a single character edit in a codebase that's 3 billion letters long, and that one edit is the difference between sitting in a cave, eating raw mammoth, and building a rocket ship to Mars. If I made a one-letter typo in a grocery list, I'd end up with milk instead of silk. If someone makes a one-letter typo in a hominid, they get a species that can split the atom.
The scientists were stunned. This wasn't a slow transition. There were no halfway versions of this gene found in the fossil record. It's as if someone walked into the lab of human evolution, scrolled down to the TKTL1 entry, and hit Update. But who pushed the button? Mainstream science calls it a highly fortuitous mutation. They want us to believe that out of the trillions of random mutations that could have happened, the one that turned us into gods just happened to land exactly where it needed to be. Exactly when we needed it.
Fortuitous! That scientists speak, for we have no idea. So please don't ask about the aliens. It's like finding a perfectly functioning Ferrari in the middle of the Jurassic period and saying it was formed by a really lucky series of mudslides.
This patch doesn't just make us smarter. It separates us from every other creature that has ever lived. It allowed us to create symbolic thought, the ability to look at a piece of wood and see a spirit, or look at a line in the sand and see a border. But every software update comes with a cost. While version 1.0, the Neanderthals were built for the planet, version 2.0 was built for the task. We were given the intellect to build civilizations, but we lost the harmony with the world we were born into. We are the only species that feels like a stranger on its own planet. We're the only ones who need to change the environment to survive it. And as we dig deeper into the source code, we're starting to realize that the TKTL1 patch might have been the first step in a silicon harvest that began long before we were even human. According to the textbooks, evolution is a master craftsman. It shapes a beak to fit a seed, a camouflage to fit a forest, and a wing to fit the wind. Over millions of years, every creature that survives becomes a perfect, seamless reflection of its environment. We are told that we are the masterpiece, that our bipedal stance freed our hands, and our large brains allowed us to conquer the planet. We are told that we are the final victorious product of the African savanna.
A masterpiece? I'm not sure I'd call a design that gives you chronic back pain if you sit in a chair for too long a masterpiece. It feels more like we're the result of a very rushed bring your child to work day in the Divine Design Studio.
The data suggests that the filter is right. If we evolved perfectly for Earth, we are its biggest anomaly. No other creature on this planet suffers from the structural, environmental, and reproductive limitations that we do. We are the only evolutionary misfit. Consider the back pain. Humans are the only mammals that suffer from chronic spinal issues. Why? Because our skeletal structure wasn't built for bipedal movement under this level of gravity. Our spines are vertical and fighting the Earth's pull on every disc, while every other ape walks horizontally, distributing the load across 4 points.
If nature designed our backs, it must have been an intern who didn't understand physics. Every time I pick up my groceries, I feel like I'm paying a gravity tax. I never agreed to. Wild animals don't need chiropractors. Think about that.
And then, there is the sun. We are the only mammals that get sunburned in minutes. Our skin is dangerously thin and lacks the melanin protection found in virtually every other creature living on the equatorial plane. We didn't evolve for this sun. We hide from it.
I lose my fur, I lose my claw protection, and my skin turns into a piece of bacon the second I step outside. In 1966, this would be a lemon. You take it back to the dealership. But for some reason, for 200,000 years, we just kept the defect.
But the most devastating bug in the human code is childbirth. For every other mammal, birth is a natural, often quick process. A horse is born and walking within an hour. A human infant is helpless, its skull only partially fused, and the process of birth itself is so dangerous to the mother and child that it was once the leading cause of death for our species. Mainstream science says this is the obstetrical dilemma, the conflict between having a narrow pelvis for upright walking and a large brain. They say it's a trade-off. But as we look at the data, the back pain, the thin skin, the fatal birth process, we must ask, is this a trade-off? Or are these the limitations of an intermediate project? In 2013, ecological researcher Dr. Ellis Silver proposed a theory that the official story cannot handle. He argued that these are the specific fingerprints of a species that did not evolve here.
Translation: we're the aliens, or at least our managers were. We were designed for a planet with lower gravity and a dimmer sun. And we've been paying the high gravity health insurance premiums for 50,000 years.
The data links this biological incompetence directly back to the Sumerian texts we will explore later. They describe a master creating a slave workforce, the Lulu, by mixing their own essence with the organic clay of a hominid. The masters needed a worker who was intelligent enough to use tools and mine the gold. But they didn't want a workforce that was too robust. They gave us the intellectual patch for productivity, TKTL1, but they left in the bugs, the biological tethers that keep version 2.0 dependent on the environment, on structure, and on them. We aren't the masterpiece. We are the intermediate solution. We were engineered to labor, not to be comfortable. The back pain you feel isn't an evolutionary error. It's a design specification. It's the scar left by an architect who valued your productivity over your comfort. If you want to understand the human code patch, you have to stop looking at history as a record of progress and start looking at it as a corporate ledger. Mainstream archaeology tells us that the Sumerians, the inhabitants of the cradle of civilization, were just imaginative storytellers. They tell us that the Enuma Elish and the Atrahasis epic are myths, primitive attempts to explain the weather or the stars. But when you read these texts through the lens of a 21st century geneticist, they don't read like myths. They read like technical manuals. The story begins not with a garden, but with a strike. The Sumerian texts describe a class of lesser gods called the Igigi. For thousands of years, these Igigi were tasked with the backbreaking labor of terraforming the earth, digging out the riverbeds of the Tigris and Euphrates, and, more importantly, mining the deep veins of gold found in the Abzu, the abyss of southern Africa.
Think about that! Even gods hate over time! The Igigi spent 2,500 years digging in the mud until they finally had enough. They burned their tools, surrounded the house of the head manager, a guy named Enlil, and basically told the management, find someone else to do the grunt work or we're out.
The management was in a bind. They needed the gold, not for jewelry, but for their own survival, possibly to stabilize their own failing atmosphere back home. The chief scientist, a master of biology named Enki, proposed a solution that changed the trajectory of the planet forever. He didn't suggest evolution. He suggested splicing. He proposed taking a creature of the earth, a primitive hominid already roaming the forests, and mixing it with the blood or the essence of a god. He wanted to create the Lulu Amelu, the primitive worker.
Mixing blood with clay. It sounds poetic until you realize that clay was the ancient word for organic matter, and blood was where the DNA lived. Enki wasn't a wizard, he was a CRISPR engineer in a robe.
The texts describe the first experiments as horrific, because they were trying to bridge the gap between a high-functioning interstellar species and a primitive ape. The early versions were full of bugs. They created creatures that couldn't stop shaking, creatures with failed organs, and monsters that were eventually cast out into the wilderness. But then they hit the turbo switch. They found the right amino acid swap, the TKTL1 patch. They created Adamu, the first man. Adamu wasn't built to be free. He was built to be compatible. Compatible with their tools, compatible with their language. He was the perfect intermediate, smart enough to understand the shift, the work schedule, but biologically throttled so he could never challenge the management.
This is the ultimate office space nightmare. We weren't created in God's image because he loved us. We were created in his image because he wanted us to be able to use his shovels.
We see the evidence of this slave code in our own biology. Why do we have 200 genetic disorders that don't exist in the wild? Why is our DNA littered with junk sequences that look like commented out code? Because we are a composite species. We are the result of a rushed engineering project designed to solve a labor shortage. The gods didn't leave because they were satisfied. They left because the harvest was complete, leaving version 2.0 behind to fend for itself in a world it was never meant to inhabit. We are the orphans of the gold mines. And every time you feel that existential dread, that feeling that you were meant for something more than a 9-to-5, that's just the master code whispering from the back of your mind, reminding you that you were built for the task, but born for the stars. Nature is the ultimate minimalist. In the wild, if a creature doesn't use an organ, it loses it. Evolution doesn't waste calories on potential. This is why a blind cavefish loses its eyes and why a flightless bird's wings wither away. Every gram of tissue must pay for itself in survival. So, if that's the law of the planet, we have to look at the human brain and ask, why is it so overbuilt? We are told that we use our entire brain, just not all at once. But the evidence from savant syndrome suggests something far more disturbing. It suggests that our brains are actually high-performance supercomputers that have been intentionally limited by a user account restriction.
It's like being handed a top-of-the-line workstation and realizing you're logged in as a guest. You can browse the web and check your email, but the system admin has locked the folders that actually run the universe, and you don't have the password.
Occasionally, the system glitches. In 2006, a man named Derek Amato dove into the shallow end of a swimming pool and suffered a severe concussion. He didn't just walk away with a headache. He walked away with a grandmaster-level ability to play the piano, something he had never studied a day in his life. He began to see musical notation as a series of black and white squares flying through his mind. He wasn't learning music, he was accessing it. There are savants who can tell you the prime factors of a 6-digit number instantly. There are savants who can draw a perfect one-to-one map of Rome after a single 10-minute helicopter ride. This isn't talent as we understand it. It is a code leak.
If the brain can do this, why doesn't it do it for everyone? If I could calculate the trajectory of a curveball using orbital mechanics, I'd be in the Hall of Fame. But instead, I walk into the kitchen and forget why I'm there. My admin is definitely asleep at the desk.
Mainstream neurobiology calls this acquired savant syndrome. They say that when the left hemisphere is damaged, the right hemisphere compensates by releasing latent abilities. But think about what that actually means. It means the ability was already there. It was just being suppressed. Why would evolution suppress the ability to calculate, to remember, or to visualize with perfect accuracy? It wouldn't. But a manager would. I.e., if you are the Anunnaki, the architects, and you are building a Lulu worker race, you want them smart enough to understand instructions, but you don't want them to be able to outthink you. You install a consciousness throttle. You give them the TKTL1 intelligence patch so they can mine the gold, but you put the deep processing behind a biological firewall.
Oh, we are throttled for our own protection, or theirs. A worker who can see the fourth dimension isn't going to be very good at digging a hole in the third. They needed us focused on the shovel, not the simulation.
This is why savants often struggle with basic social cues or everyday tasks. The throttle is a filter that keeps us grounded in the material world. When the filter breaks, the God code leaks through, and the human mind is overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the data it was never meant to handle. We are the only species that has hidden talents that only appear when our brains are broken. We are the only species with a locked potential. And as we move into the final chapter, we have to ask, what happens to a slave race when it finally figures out how to hack its own admin password? We are the first generation in the history of version 2.0 that can actually read the source code. For 200,000 years, we looked at the stars and saw gods. For 5,000 years, we looked at the clay and saw myths. But today, we look at the DNA and we see architecture. We've seen the intelligence patch in the TKTL1 gene, the single amino acid swap that shouldn't have happened by accident. We've seen the biological bugs that prove we weren't built for this planet's gravity or its sun. And we've seen the savant glitch, the evidence that our brains are high-performance machines currently running on a guest account. But there is one final question the archive asks. If we were built for a task, is that task almost finished? The Sumerian texts, the Adam and Eve story, and the geological record all point to the same terrifying pattern. Every 12,000 years, the Earth experiences a defrag, a solar sneeze, a magnetic pole shift, a global reset. The last one happened 11,600 years ago, the end of the Younger Dryas.
So the lease is up. We've mined the gold, we've built the neural network, and now the landlord is coming back with a notice to evict. And by notice, I mean a 2-mile-high wall of water. I really need to stop checking the mail.
Mainstream science confirms that the Earth's magnetic field is currently weakening. The North Pole is moving faster than at any point in recorded history. To a geologist, this is a slow process. But to a programmer, this looks like a system shutdown.
Maybe it's not an eviction. Maybe it's just a software update. Version 3.0 is coming, and I just hope it has better knees and a higher tolerance for UV rays. I'm tired of buying sunblock.
Now, is it possible that Chan Thomas was just an eccentric engineer? Is it possible that the TKTL1 mutation was just a 1 in a trillion cosmic accident? Of course, science is built on the maybe. But if you look at the ripples in the Sahara, the ringing of the hollow moon, and the God code hidden in your own neocortex, you realize that the official story requires more faith than the forbidden one. We are told we are the masters of our fate, but we might just be the most advanced project the universe has ever attempted. We were built for the task, patched for the harvest, and left to wonder why we feel so alone in a universe that seems to be built exactly like us.
If we are a project, I hope the admins are impressed. We've made some pretty good music, and we invented pizza. That's gonna be worth a few more than 1,000 years on the clock.
So what do? We keep looking at the code. We keep digging for the admin password. because the only way to stop being a slave race is to understand the mind of the architect. Maybe the reset is coming. Maybe June 12th is just another day. But until then, remember that you are more than the sum of your patches. You are the consciousness of the universe experiencing itself through a very strange, very throttled biological filter.
And if the water starts rising, I'll see you all at the mountaintop. I'm bringing the pizza.
Keep your eyes on the stars. Watch the errors in the world. And most importantly, be kind to the other workers. We're all running the same code. Stay vigilant. The archive is never truly closed.